Hello and welcome to the third session of Wallet Wisdom. My name is Anna Schwimmer, Family Resource Management Extension Agent from the Phillips Works Extension District, and I will be your host for this event. This series is brought to you by the K-State Research Extension Family Resource Management Program Focus Team. All programs are open to all. We do not discriminate against any of those protected classes. Kansas State University is a part of a land grant system which has a three-part mission of education, research, extension. K-State Research and Extension, being the extension or outreach part of that mission, provides resources and educational programming to empower residents and communities across the state. We have offices in every county in the state of Kansas. Some counties have gone together to form extension districts as indicated on this map. Your local office can be found by going to the URL on this slide and posted in that chat box and clicking on your county. Before we get started, we are recording. Names and/or appearances of persons may be captured in recordings. We understand that financial matters are personal, and any questions you ask in the chat feature can only be seen by the host. So send your questions to Anna Schwimmer, and I will ask your questions out loud to the presenter without using your name. Wallet Wisdom is a financial series. Today's topic is where we look at spending plans. This is the third of our Wallet Wisdom series. We've included dates and a list of topics we will be covering during the 6 weeks for you to mark your calendars. You can join us for as many as you're able or interested in, and these programs will be recorded, so if you have to miss a week, you can go back and catch them. We will also be sending out the PowerPoints and a link to the recording after each week's workshop. The information provided in the session does not and is not intended to constitute financial advice. Instead, all information, content, and materials presented are for general information and educational purposes only. Everyone's financial situation is different, and there's no one size fits all when it comes to personal finance. This series of programs is not intended to be a substitute for personalized financial advice. Again, I want to remind you to make sure that you are muted and you've stopped your video for bandwidth. And we are getting ready now to start the program. Presenting today is Renee Reddy. She is the Family Consumer Science Agent with the Chisholm Trail District, specializing in family resource management and aging. Renee has been with K-State Research and Extension as an agent for 6 years and has had a specific interest in financial management that sparked as a student years ago at KSU. So without further delay, I will turn it over to Renee.
All right, thank you, Anna. So welcome everybody to our presentation today. We're going to start with a poll actually. So if we could launch that, just so we can get an idea here. Do you currently use a spending plan or a budget? And we'll give here just a moment for everybody to have an opportunity. Okay, if we want to go ahead and close the poll. All right, so majority of us on the call today anyway has said that some of us, yes, we do. About 9% of us use a spending plan or a budget. 70% of us do somewhat, and 22% of us don't use one at all. Okay. So we'll go ahead and keep going. So today, as far as spending plans go, we're going to just kind of hit on about 5 areas here very briefly. First of all, what a spending plan is and why we should have one, kind of how to get started, then the actual creation of one, as well as then to be able to step back and take a look at how things are going once we have created one and are using one. So let's start with what a spending plan is and really why should we have one? So a spending plan is just a different name for the B word or budget. A lot of people, when they think about budgets, think about them negatively. I think about that in the nutrition world when we're told we need to go on a specific diet or something. That sounds very restrictive. So as in a lot of things that we have, it's kind of the way we frame it. And so by calling it a spending plan, maybe it doesn't sound so restrictive. Often it's a written way to see how your income and your outflows are happening with your money. And I say often because believe it or not, you do have a plan, whether it's an organized plan or not, most people are spending the income that they have. It also can help us, a spending plan can help us organize to get to our financial obligations, to make sure those are taken care of, as well as to work towards our financial goals. And then what I think about the main reason some people have, and maybe not, besides those financial goals, is to really think about giving those dollars a job. I mean, we're working towards or working for our income. And so why not make our dollars work as hard for us as we are working hard to earn them? So getting started, kind of the first thing you need to do is think about tracking. I think some people feel like they know how much they're spending, but unless they're actually tracking it, they might be surprised at what they're spending or what their income is even. And so I think kind of the easier part of getting started with creating a spending plan is thinking about the income. Generally, that's not maybe as much in terms of writing and collecting as expenses are. And so just getting started with writing down your income, but also thinking about things that maybe don't come to you in a money or a check form, such as WIC benefits or SNAP benefits that certainly do help provide in your budget or to your household. And then the next part of it then is maybe not quite as easy, or at least in my mind, writing down all those expenses. And so you would need to do this for at least a month and maybe even up to 3 months, because as you know, we don't spend exactly the same every month generally, that there's sometimes things come up or there's just bills that are due that aren't a monthly bill. And so I like to say write them down, but there's other ways you can collect these expenses. So you can just keep every receipt. And you can even create your own receipt if you spend in cash. And so I just keep a little pad in my purse or in my vehicle. Generally, it's for when I don't get receipts when I get gas on my credit card. But that would be another way to kind of help keep track of that. Cash can float out of your wallet pretty easily, and you're not 100% sure where it goes. And so that would be one way to just kind of keep track there. You could look at your bill statements, your check registers, your bank statements, anything like that that's already printed to get an idea of where you're spending. And then do think about when you're writing down these expenses, your non-monthly bills. So, you know, it might be that your car tags come up in one of these months, the 3 months that you're first looking at here as you're getting started. And that would be really, it's a yearly expense for most. And so that wouldn't necessarily, it might blow that budget up, I guess, for that particular month if you only look at things in just a one snapshot situation. And so other things to consider on getting this tracking started is to actually, if you have a partner in this who helps make financial decisions, and if they're spending money, and I'm not talking about maybe teens or children in your household, but any of those sources of income that you are accounting towards your household income, if anybody is spending out of that, they are making financial decisions when they spend. So do your very best to have a conversation with them. Think about how you're framing it. If you're talking about more of the budget situation that feels restrictive, people might not get on board with that, and for a lot of reasons. But if you kind of frame it as, hey, how about we just take a look at this and actually get it in black and white and see how it goes, maybe you'll get a little more cooperation. So again, as I said, the first part of this is just talking about income. And what I put on here is just an example of a form that actually comes from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. This is just one idea of how to get started. And this would be actually maybe even when you're categorizing it, for sure. When you're looking at it in this way, you might need to change some of the categories. So again, this is just an example of a form or as a part of a tool. Certainly, you could set up a spreadsheet if you already use Excel. If you use Google, there's Google Sheets you can use. There's opportunities there if you'd rather use a computer to do it. You could certainly use software as well. So that would just be considerations. There's apps out there that you could use on your phone, and that is totally up to whatever works best for you, which is what you're going to hear me say a lot probably, is just what works best for you, and you might have to try a few things to know what works best for you. And then, of course, you could just write it all on paper. You know, that works really well for a lot of people as well, especially when you're getting started here. And so this is, again, just one example of a form that you could use. And then when you're going to expenses, kind of the same thing there. This is, again, just a form. This is from CFPB. Think about, do these categories fit? And if not, if you use this particular form, you know, cross out and put on the categories that do work for you. You know, you may want to really dig in to your categories and maybe not. For example, I'm looking at this and it's showing eating out and it's showing entertainment. And for me, I use some software to track mine. For me, eating out is considered entertainment, but not everybody looks at it that way. So it just depends what works best for you. If you really want to dig in, the more specific you are, the better picture you're going to get, particularly if you want to make some changes in your spending. Some things that people do find is, you know, you don't know where all your money is going. And, you know, does your money have wings? Sort of thought process on that. And so when you're thinking about that, if you do want to delve into that more, there is it's part of a curriculum that we have that's available for free online through K-State Research and Extension, that you can actually get to an activity that's called Does Your Money Have Wings? Through the Essential Living Skills, Money Management. And that information may be in the chat. It'll also be on the resource slide a little bit later. As you're putting together the expenses in particular, as you're categorizing them, think about, you know, your wants versus your needs. And so maybe some things are going to be sort of straightforward. You know, when you're paying your utilities, they kind of are what they are. There's a little bit of savings maybe you could find in there and maybe not. But maybe as you're putting together your grocery, and I may reference grocery a lot because that's one of the shockers, I guess, for me as I'm tracking our expenses in my household. That to me is a flexible expense because I certainly can control to some degree how much I'm spending on that. But it is good to be reflective kind of while you're putting this together. So a time to compare. That's when we're going to look at all those income, all the income that you've come up with, and then your expenses as well. So for however long you track them. How did they come together for you? Were you overspending more than what your income was? Is that what your finding was? Or did you actually have some money left at the end of the month? And I would wonder if you did find that to be the case, do you see that proof in wherever you store your money, whether that's in your drawer or in your bank account? Are you seeing that to be reflective? And that's why I kind of think having more than 1 month of expenses to look at is kind of helpful. And when you were considering those expenses, did you include savings or investment dollars if that's part of your goal? So I know that in the coming sessions, there's going to be more discussion about savings. So I'm not going to talk about it a whole lot other than to say that is really something to consider, because as we're thinking about setting up a spending plan, we're really looking at working towards freedom, of financial freedom, whether that is we have that little bit of emergency money that's available when the unexpected happens, and it doesn't blow up our budget and we're wondering how we're going to make our rent or our house payment or pay our utilities or get food. That's the thing, that's the place we don't want to be in. And so thinking about including that as a part of that, because I'm not sure that was in those categories on that particular form, that's really something to think about. The next part is, can you achieve your financial goal that you set in session 1 with what you're doing right now? And so hopefully everyone had an opportunity to watch that. And if not, just setting up a SMART goal, something that's very specific about what you're working towards. That does help you stick to a plan, I feel like, if you're working towards something. And so it could be something very simple, it could be huge. And so just think about, how is this working so far when you're comparing? And then going back to your whole, do your dollars all have a job? And so if your budgeting style that we're going to talk about here in just a moment, if it's just whatever's left I save, or if there isn't anything left, those are all considerations when we're thinking about how our bottom line sort of comes out. If you find you need to adjust spending, so that's why I kind of suggested at the beginning, as you're putting together your expenses into categories, to really be analyzing the wants versus the needs when you're thinking about that. You may need to prioritize how you're spending, especially if it is not allowing you to get to your financial goal that you've set, or goals. Another thing I think about when I'm thinking about wants versus needs. So you do have some basic needs. You need shelter, you need clothing, you need food. Those are our basic human needs, along with a few others, certainly. But if your budget is as such that you need to make some cuts, think about, do I need more clothes? Or is it, I want something new? And it's okay to have wants, and it's okay if your budget allows to allow for those things. I just need shelter. Do I need a mansion? Those are the things to consider. If that's in your budget and that's your priority, fantastic. So the next piece I think about when I think about wants and needs is actually a book that I read a number of years ago that was actually published in the late 90s, and it was called Your Money or Your Life. And so when I'm trying to decipher, is this a need for me or is this a want? And does this meet my goals? I think about the little bit that I gleaned from that years ago. And that was thinking about, I might have this income that, say it might be, I don't know, for example, $15 an hour. And I think, well, I make $15 an hour. I deserve to buy whatever. But in the end, there's cost to working. And you really need to figure out what your cost is to the income that you get. And so do think about that. And then once you have determined what that is, it might be $5 less than what you make an hour. It could be more than that, even depending on what your transportation costs are, clothing, eating out, childcare, all those things that happen. Then that gives you just another tool to think about. Is this something that I really want to spend my life energy on, because you're trading your time for the income? And of course, in addition to adjusting your spending, you could work more. You could take a second job. You could create a side hustle. You could maybe change jobs even in order to increase your income. And that certainly does work for some folks. Another thing to think about, saving on purchases, and again, I'm not going to delve too much into this because there's going to be opportunities in other sessions to do this, but thinking about shopping around, doing your research, not doing those impulse purchases unless it's just a matter of life or death sort of thing. And there isn't too many that has to do with purchases that are that, like, I can't even think about it 24 hours. There are a few exceptions to those, especially in today's market, it seems. But those too shall pass, is what I think. Before you purchase something, think about, could I borrow it or could I rent it? And that would be really important. I think about people who decide suddenly they're going to garden, and gosh, but I need a tiller. Does your neighbor have something like that? This gardening is just an example. Maybe keeping your investment low when you get started. Maybe you decided you want to buy a Tesla, for instance. Maybe you ought to go rent one, if you can even do that, and see if it's as great as it seems before you make the investment in it. And then the last thing I'm going to just talk on here a little bit about saving on purchases is with anything, if we can plan ahead, it's helpful. You know, if you're looking at your budget saying, and I'm just going to use food for example on this, if you're looking at your budget saying, gosh, we eat out too much, and we eat out because we feel we need to, because we don't have time, and not because we just really enjoy eating out. That if that's a value for you, that's fantastic. This is not exactly what I'm talking about then. But if you're eating out because you didn't have a chance to get something ready, gosh, if you know you got something going Tuesday night, maybe it's a ball game on Saturday, Sunday, whenever, when you're preparing something else, think ahead for the week. What can I do to help keep my budget in check, to spend my money where I want to? And if that's just one area you want to, you've planned ahead for it, and then you have that available so that you don't have to think about, well, gosh, we got to go through drive-through, because that takes time as well. So now to the next part then. So making your plan, this is where you're creating it. And so sometimes we're asked, you know, what would be guidelines or things that would help us get started. So some of the things that I seem to see trending and actually been around for even a long time, even back to, I don't know, 20, 30 years, is talking about percentages. So how much should I be spending? Well, really the answer to that is what works best for you in your situation. There's certainly some guidance out there from different gurus that maybe say, you know, 50% should be on your needs, and 20 or 30% on your wants, and then 20 or 30% on your savings. You know, that might work just fine for you. I've also seen 70% for your needs, 10% for your wants, and 20% for your savings. Again, those are just guidelines, and most everybody's situation can be a little different. So just think of those as just very, very general guides. If you're feeling like, man, I really need to get things hashed out and under control, you could try the envelope system, where you just put the cash for whatever your expense is into an envelope, and when it's gone for the month. This is something that I probably wouldn't recommend for some of your fixed expenses, such as like rent or your mortgage. That's just something you just probably shouldn't pay for in cash anyway. Utilities would be another example of that. But this is something I actually used in my house just for a few months for groceries, because I thought, man, I can do better in this. And I don't mind challenging myself on things sometimes. So that was just something I used, sort of a combination of. So that's sort of an old school way, but you're only spending then what you have. And so especially if you're relying on credit to help you get through the month, this might be a way to sort of get a hold on how you're doing. Another idea would be the reverse budget, which would be you're just saving, or you're just paying yourself first in a form of savings. It depends on your situation, but certainly no matter what budget you're looking at or spending plan, you should be considering some savings. And then the last one I list on here is zero-based budgeting. And that's just that every dollar that comes in has a plan, it has a job. And so just knowing that there isn't just this $5 laying here, or 50 or 500 or whatever it is, that every one of your dollars is spoken for. And it isn't that it's necessarily spent, it's just spoken for. So again, there's tons of tools you can use out there to help you. You may have to try a few. You know, we talked about some forms, the spreadsheets, the software. I use a very old school software. It works for me, so that's what I do. If while you're making this plan, and especially if you're new to a plan, it may be helpful to set up a calendar for when your bills are due, whether those are debt payments, whether, you know, it's your mortgage, it's your utilities, whatever it is, kind of those fixed ones. It may help you, particularly if you're not paid every month, by the month, I should say. Everybody hopefully is paid every month, but maybe they get more than one paycheck a month. That might help you sort of arrange which paycheck you need to use to pay which bill. And there is an example on here, and I believe it's been put into the chat. It will also be on the resource page. So then, once you've had a chance to actually try the budget, maybe you need to try it for more than a month. Certainly you may want to look at it after a month and say, did the guide that I used, did that really work for what the goal I was going towards? was I realistic about the money amounts that I budgeted? You know, if I found out that I was spending $800 a month on groceries and suddenly I said, I'm only spending $400 this month, you might need to take a look at that and say, hey, did this work okay? And then case of groceries, it might work because maybe you were stocked up and it wasn't a big deal, or maybe you just ate out more and your money for eating out was in another category. But being realistic about it is really, really important. Another thing to consider is, how did your team do if you had to have a team? If you're just doing this for yourself, then you are your team. That's totally fine. Often though, when you have to bring in a partner to this, it can cause things to get a little bit more complicated, or it might work beautifully and you worked great as a team. The next thing to think about then as a part of that team, but also individually, is, did what you had set up, your plan, did that help you progress to maybe a goal you're after? And your goal might just be to make the ends meet. It can be that simple. And that's a great goal to get started for sure. If you felt like you were deprived, or man, I really hate this because I can't go do whatever I want, that's okay. Maybe you need to think about putting in some fun money or some want money if you didn't have that in your budget. And you know that we have money to enjoy it. I mean, that's part of why we go to work and that sort of thing. And so think about that. That's not a bad thing. There are ways to have fun and that don't cost a lot of money, and there are ways to have fun that cost a lot of money. So that might be something you have to adjust, but those are certainly things to think about. And then if you had the opportunity to watch session 2, Dr. McCoy talked about our money scripts. And so keeping those in mind as you're evaluating, and even just thinking about how things went for that month. That was from session 2. If you have not watched that and taken the assessment, I really, really suggest that you do that, because there's so many pieces to how we spend our money. And then lastly, and maybe not lastly, but in my mind, certainly we need to think about giving ourselves grace, because we're trying something new potentially, or we're tweaking something we've been working on. And so just know that I believe it was Dr. McCoy who said, we weren't born knowing how to manage money. We had to learn it. And so just give yourself the grace that you're moving forward. So this slide just talks about some of our resources. I have referenced in a few of them today. K-State Research and Extension does have the Spend Some, Save Some, Share Some family budgeting back sheet that is available. That's just another tool if you wanted some more information, or also in the Leader's Guide, there are some budgeting forms. So if you would like to utilize those, that's just one more of those forms in the tools that are available. Our valuable records was also recently updated through K-State Research and Extension. And if you did your net worth statement from the first guide, or from the first session, you started pulling some things together at that point. And if you have not written down all of your assets and your debts, all of that information, our valuable records is a form fillable document that can help you get started. And so, and while you're doing all this digging, if it might be for the first time, write it all down right there. You're off to a great start with some estate planning. I referenced the Does Your Money Have Wings? There is the guide, or the link again for that. And then the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, they have, in addition to what I showed in the slides today, they have several other tools that you might find helpful. The last one I listed on here was the National Endowment for Financial Education. Again, this is just more about spending plans, and they have other educational tools on there. If you might be interested though, I did see that they are retiring their site in July 31st. So if you think you might be interested in taking a look, be sure to take a look prior to then. So now we are ready to entertain any questions or comments. So if you have any, would like to send those to Anna, please select her in the chat, and she will be able to share then.
At this time, we don't have any questions, but please, if you have any, send them to me, and I will answer them without using your name. I should say, will ask them without using your name. Renee will do the answering.
And I don't know if I've mentioned this yet or not, but if this is something that you just need a little help with, you're welcome to reach out to me. Certainly, we have an extension office, as Anna said, and showed in the map. We have an extension office in every county in the state. Feel free to reach out to them. There are some nonprofits that help with this sort of work as well. If you're looking at ways you need to reduce your spending and you're looking for maybe, just basic things within your household, I generally don't say, oh, go look at the internet as my first resort, but there's really a lot of good information and good ideas out there of ways to reduce your spending if you're looking at your household spending. So don't be afraid to look at that. I look up things like saving money. I look up frugal living. Those are all just general ways that you can help if you're looking for ways to save in your household.
Okay, we do have a couple of questions that came in. The first one is, how do you budget for sudden kid expenses, such as a basketball team t-shirts, class party fees, graduation right now is kind of coming up, and some of those into the school year. How do you budget for those sudden kid expenses?
Sure. So as you're able to develop your budget, you might just think about that and maybe think about that over the course of the year. You're exactly right. Some of those things really, it could be suddenly a bunch of weddings that you didn't know about, or the graduation, you got more announcements than you were anticipating. And so I would definitely set up a category for that as you're setting up your budget. But again, that's where it will be helpful for you to think about really over the course of the year. Some of your things if you're thinking about right now, some things are flexible. If maybe you've got plenty of food in your pantry, and that will be where you could glean a few bucks. Some of your things are they are fixed and you can't change that. And so, the other pieces of that is sometimes you just have to say, I just can't do this right now. And that's an option too. What else can I do? Can I help do something rather than providing something monetarily? What would you have to add to that, Anna?
I agree. Sometimes there's just not anything you can do. Sometimes if you keep track of where you are spending your money, you might be surprised that extra coffee or a pop, you might be able to save money that way in order to get that t-shirt that was kind of surprised that you didn't know you'd need to have. So there might be a few places there that you can find money that you really haven't thought about. Another question, it's so hard to stick to a budget. Kids ask for things. My partner doesn't want to help keep track. Any thoughts on how to get everyone on board with the team?
So probably the first thing, I have this struggle myself at my house, and mom's kind of the one that's super passionate about let's write things down and figure out where things are going. And so it depends on the age of your kids that you're talking about or talking with. If you have elementary age kids, you can just talk about, gosh, we're a team here, and these are some of our goals, and this is what we're working towards. And just thinking about how you're framing it for them too, that maybe we have enough money, but most people have enough for, maybe don't have enough for every single want that they have. And so, doing your best and being diligent about the language you use, as well as, we're going to do this because we're looking at the big picture here. And so it is hard. And it's hard when your kids' peers have all the things your kids are asking for. They're going to those teams parties, they're doing, whatever, they have the latest, whatever. Those are hard decisions. And so you're teaching them though, for their future as well. In terms of a partner, just do the best you can on that. That's a hard one. Sometimes when your partner, they say, I work hard for my money, I want to spend it how I want, or they say, I'm bringing it, I bring the money home, you figure out how to make it all work. Those are just conversations, and I suggest not in the heat of it, when maybe your partner spent differently than what you would suggest or what you would like. just, getting into where maybe you're talking about just regularly once a month, if nothing else, just saying, okay, here's where we're at. What are we working towards here? When we come together as a team and as a collective, with a collective goal, some of that just helps. But you may need to be the cheerleader all along, and the reminder of this is what we're after. That's why we're making these choices. Anna, do you have something to add to that?
My husband would keep a blank check in his billfold. And I understood why he wanted to do that, because sometimes you may get caught without enough cash for something. But he would never tell me or put it in the checkbook that he had used it. So that was a definite problem that we had. And so I finally got so that once a month when we'd pay the bills, or I usually was the one paying the bills, he would have to sit down with me so we both knew. And if he did spend it, he could say, oh yeah, this is where I spend it on. So yeah, that was a definite problem. And you just have to be communicating and open with each other that, yes, we can both spend, but let's make sure we have it written down. So another question is, my wife does not like the word budget. To her, it means restricted. How do I get a spouse on board with me if I am committed and she is not?
That's tough. That's tough. Money arguments have to be in the top percentages of situations and partnerships that make things really hard. I think that goes back to coming together with a mutual goal. I believe in earlier sessions, they talked about dreaming and coming up with goals. If there's no goal, I think that makes it harder to get somebody to kind of come your way. Another thing I maybe would suggest, and I totally am with you, when you say budget, that turns off most people. Thinking about the language, like we're just going to have a plan for our money and we're going to use it as a guide, and not this is the gospel and it's hard. If you have in your budget, and maybe in this particular question, maybe the spouse is just like, I just want some freedom. So if that means that, then maybe you have money that you just each have as partners that no one can say anything about. That's something that we did in ours, because I felt like I was being really critical of my spouse on how he was spending some of his dollars. And he didn't spend a lot, but boy, Renee had a lot to say about it. And so that can help with that to somewhat, if you can come to a concession on, okay, I understand you're not about this. However, how can we meet in the middle on this? Can we work something out? And hopefully your income versus your expenses has that latitude in order to have the freedom of, well, if they want to get that coffee, or if they want to get that, lunch out or whatever, that they don't feel like they are either doing something behind your back or think that it'll cause an issue or fight maybe later. But it takes a little bit sometimes when you have a partner who isn't as excited about it as you are.
Yes, I agree. That's kind of why I like the terminology spending plan over budget, because budgets do seem restrictive, that, you've got to stay on budget, and spending plan indicates, hey, you can spend, but, and then again, just remind them, we got to communicate about this. We're partners. It's not easy, but the communication really is the big key, I think. And find a term that means the same thing, but maybe they don't feel that restriction with it, like a budget. Another question is, it feels like we spend more for the Christmas and holidays than we should. Then we use our credit cards to buy what we want or need. How we do it different? How should we do it differently this year?
So the first thing that comes to my mind is actually just setting up I'm going to use the budget word here. Just setting up a budget for Christmas. Maybe you have traditions in your house or in your family that say everyone gets a gift or something like that. So maybe you could start with that. And this time of year, if you need to have conversations outside of your household, this time of year is a great time to have it. You're not in the heat of it, and it's okay. You know, in the end, I think most of us have more things than what we can ever use or certainly appreciate. And so if you're thinking about your purchases being things, that might be a way to kind of explain that sort of situation. Then maybe your focus needs to be less on how much money are you spending and more about the people and the people you're spending it with. Starting to save now would be really important. If you already know, you know, my kids were young, I would hit every time I was in a store, I'd hit the clearance part because I knew they were interested in certain things, and I was able to spread out my spending over the course of time. Much harder when they became teens. Didn't work so well then. Cash was king then, so that's kind of hard. So at that point for me, I just set aside some. So shopping ahead can help with Christmas. Setting aside money now for Christmas, a little bit at a time. There used to be promotions at banks. They called them Christmas clubs, where it was just a special savings account. If you need to set up a savings account at wherever your bank, if you are banking somewhere, set it up, put it aside. That's what this is for that. Yeah, I hear a lot about the spending hangover in January and February because we were there, we loved it. You know, it was on sale, it was great. My kids would love it. Or my family would love it. Those sometimes are hard to say no to. So that's because when in the end, if that cost you $100 for that item and you had to take 2, 3, 6 months, a year, pay for it, you paid an awful lot for that $100 item, especially at the interest rates of credit cards. What would you add to that, Anna?
Well, the only thing I probably would add, you know, the Christmas Club accounts are great because you have that going, you know, automatically going in there every month. I would also divide what your normal expenses are. If you're the one that is always having a whole family over for Christmas dinner and you get stuck with most of the cost of the big items like the meat and such, and everybody else is bringing a salad or a dessert, maybe it's time to kind of visit with your whole family and say, hey, how about if so-and-so does the hosting this year for the family, or we do something a little different. And then, yes, as the kids get older, their toys get more expensive. And so it might also, one of the things that we have done with my grandkids is, because grandmas get, you know, oh, I spoil them, I know, but I've started doing, they get a book and they get, a book, a piece of clothing, and then one toy instead of 10 toys or whatever. And they all have the same, I plan on and budget for a certain amount. And I think the key is, again, I shouldn't say budget, but plan on spending a certain amount on each grandchild. And so, but they do change, and you just have to make that decision. And maybe it's just instead of toys or gifts, going and doing a community service someplace. And a lot of times the kids will get just as much out of that as a lot of toys.
Anna, I might want to add, that sparked something for me too. You're exactly right. You know, maybe it's time to look, if it's a tradition of some of the things Anna just said, maybe it's time to start a new tradition. And maybe that tradition is maybe it's more of a potluck, for example, or maybe it's 3 gifts. You know, there's a lot of great ideas out there for helping with that. But I think mostly just thinking about, first of all, just how much can you afford, and start saving right now for it.
Another question that came up is, for younger age kids, can you explain how you taught your children about chores, allowances, just looking for ideas, looking for the best way for our family to teach our children about the value of money and work ethic?
Sure. Do you want to start with that one, Anna?
We started with our kids. We didn't really give them an allowance, but whenever I would sit down to pay bills and such, I always explained to them that, you know, Dad and Mom go to work and then we have to pay bills, and started with that. And then they had, 4-H projects where they got their fair money from, and we would talk how, you know, the importance of saving and the importance of using some of that. We always talked about saving for college, for their education. We did a lot of talking, and then as they got older, um, they had jobs, but they really weren't paying jobs. What I should say is they worked on the farm. And so their 4-H calves, their 4-H pigs and such were, they had to use that money and figure out how they were going to pay for food, and when that went through the premium sale, and so on. So their jobs working on the farm basically paid for their animals and their food and such. So our situation is a little different, but that's kind of how we did it. And I have raised 3 kids that right now it's very important for them to save for the rainy day. I think they probably heard me say that so many times, that to save when it's needed, which really helped 2 of them out with this COVID. So they had money in their bank. So I think the communication is the biggest part of letting them make mistakes, letting them have money to make mistakes with. But they also were very good at, Mom, I need $20 because I need to, or I want to go to the concession stand. And then I'd give them maybe not $20, but $5. And I may not ever see that, but then, so they were good at doing that too. I don't know, Renee, do you have to add to that?
Just a little bit. And just because this is what I did didn't mean it was right. It's just one idea. My kids also, I believe that there was some things they should do, like taking care of their room, you know, that sort of thing. That was just part of their thing. But we did have a chore chart, and it didn't pay a great wage. But pretty soon our kids kind of got that figured out. And what I did actually, and because the wage was so low, is that if they did a really great job, or if they did it without me asking, whatever their chore was for the week, we did a double pay on it, almost like a bonus. If they were working, you know, sometimes that does happen in our adult lives, is that if we do an excellent job, we are financially rewarded. And so we did also talk about, we valued education in our house. So we talked about saving. We talked about spending a little bit. I wanted them to go out and spend a little bit of their cash. My kids learned pretty early that, you know, you can mention something to Mom, but I'm highly unlikely to buy it if we're standing in the store. That we needed to have talked about it already. And so that was one of the things that worked. Depending on the ages of your kids, if you have kids in early childhood, certainly there is lots of books out there about money that you can just talk about those things. And also, if you know your values are giving as well, and ours was in our house as well, we talked about giving a little bit of what we earned. So if in the end we did not do allowances just for the fact that you lived in your house, there are a lot of people who do that. They give the allowance. The exception to that for me was when my kids became teenagers. I gave them an X amount of budget for the clothing that they wanted to purchase for the year, and they had to decide how to budget that money. I didn't necessarily hand it to them. In this case, I believe it was like $200 or something when they were whatever age. And if they didn't spend it all, they got to carry it over. And I didn't expect necessarily until they were older. You know, my kids played sports, so if they knew that they needed, especially if they didn't take care of something, that expectation was, to help them learn the budgeting part of that a little more with bigger dollars, was to use it in that way. And so that's just what worked to some degree for me. I have my kids aren't completely raised, so I guess it remains to be seen whether that was a good strategy or not. But we also value a work ethic at our house, and I did not, and nor did my husband, feel like we should just hand them money. And so it's whatever you come to, whatever you decide works best for your household. There is a publication out there that Dr. Kish, who's our family resource management specialist, partnered with, that you could also take a look at as well to help you get started. There's lots of ideas out there. We could talk a whole session on teaching kids about money for sure.
There's a comment, when I was married, what would have worked better is to split bills needs by percentage of income and split rest equally. So do you want to comment anything on that?
Well, I had something similar that said if there's big differences in spending habits, is having separate checkbooks or accounts. And for some couples that or partnerships, that works really well. That works the best. I like the idea of the percentages though, because otherwise, if you just take your bills and you divide it by half, your incomes might not be equal. And so, and in fact, one income, the person who maybe has the lower income, for that matter, might be the one who picks up the most slack at home. And I think when you think about that, that could lead to some resentment if basically the lower income worker has to put all of their money in and they don't have any money for themselves. So I would just be careful, I guess, and really like the idea of considering the percentages. Because that's a really good idea. I still think you need to have money conversations about future, because even if I put in my money for just the regular bills that we're paying, but I don't save anything for retirement or for later, I may really affect my partner in the future if we don't have some sort of similar goals. So I think some things you're definitely still going to need to talk about with your partner and kind of make sure you're on the same page, because some people would just be like living for today, not thinking about that, or that I am saving for retirement, but it's such a small amount, it won't get you to your goals. And so that would be probably my comments on that one, Anna.
I agree with that. Sometimes, we've been talking too about partners, and your partner may not always be there. My husband died when I still had a junior in high school and one getting ready to go into college. And your financial, I hadn't thought about that second income. We've been living with two incomes. All of a sudden, that second income was gone, but I still had the same expenses. So if you don't plan for that retirement, if you don't plan for the savings, it's amazing. Yes, we had life insurance, but that life insurance does not last. It lasted about 3 years is what it did. So, those are things that you need to look on into the future, just not today. And it's something that you need to communicate and think together about what's going to happen in the future, and not just today. How whichever spouse is left, make sure you each know how to work that spending plan, and what will happen when you do lose one income. And it doesn't necessarily have to be by death. It can be by an income being lost because someone was let go at their job. So, have one more question, and I think that will probably bring us to close to 12 o'clock, is my car just went into the mechanic shop for a new starter. It cost $775 and change. I did have an emergency fund, but I lost half of it with paying that bill. It is so discouraging.
Yeah, that is. And sometimes things like that slap us more than once before we can even recover, for sure. And so kudos to you for having that available to you, because could you imagine the stress if you didn't have that opportunity? Even if that was, well, I'll just have to put on my credit card. Not everybody has that option even. So yes, it stinks. It's hard. I always say it's hard being an adult sometimes, because it's part of being responsible. That it'd be great to just be able to have my money to spend it however I want. But I say good job to you for having that cash available, and just do what you can to get it replenished for the next thing, because unfortunately there's often a next thing, the next not so fun expenditure that we may need to make.
Okay. We want to thank you for joining us today, and please complete a short evaluation. Your feedback's really important, and we appreciate it. It helps us improve the program. You can use the QR code that is up here on the screen, or you can visit the link that is here. We look forward to seeing you next week. It will be Increasing Savings on May 13th at 12 o'clock. Gary Fife will be the presenter at that one. And if you want the next slide.
Okay, I was looking to see if that link had been put into the chat for the, so it's easy just to click on. Maybe it's there and I just don't see it. But that's okay. We can keep trucking and I'll come back to it.
Previous recordings are on the Wallet Wisdom playlist, YouTube, at this link. And I believe that this link has been put in. I think I saw it someplace earlier. I think Elizabeth put it in. If you'd like to contact Renee, her email address is on the screen and in the chat box. Thank you, Renee, for sharing your knowledge of spending plans, and we hope to see you all next week. Thank you for attending.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I'll go back to that screen that has our survey on it.
And I see Elizabeth did put the Qualtrics survey link in the chat box.
Okay, all right. I'll go back to my contact information. I encourage you to, I love talking about spending plans and about saving money. So I encourage you to give me a call or send me an email if you have more questions. You know, everybody's situation is a little different, or contact your local extension agent.